Luke 17 through 19. I've got 45 minutes of stuff to say in about 15 minutes. So I'm going to start rocking and rolling. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of bring up some points throughout this section, and they're all, try to weave them together because they all, I think, culminate in chapter 19. So in chapter 18, there's a story in verses 9 through 14. I'll read it here. It says, "And he also spoke this parable to some who relied on themselves, that they were righteous and looking down on others. Two men went to a set-apart place to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and began to pray with himself this way, 'Elohim, I thank you that I am not like the rest of men, swindlers, unrighteous, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess.' But the tax collector, standing at a distance, would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but also beating his chest, saying, 'Elohim, show favor on me, a sinner.' I say to you, this man went into his house declared right, rather than the other. For everyone who is exalting himself shall be humbled, and he who is humbling himself shall be exalted." Here we have a contrast of a self-righteous man and a humble man. And he declares himself, the tax collector, he beats his breast and says, "Have mercy on me, a sinner." And this phrase, "a sinner," I wanted to spend a moment on is, in a certain sense, we're all sinners. It says in Romans, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So we're all sinners in some sort of aspect. But there is kind of this term means a little bit more than that, in that it's like has a lot of contextual, social things connected to it. There are two kind of categories or classifications of what a sinner is when it talks in the New Testament. For instance, the Pharisees are never actually called sinners, but when Yeshua was debating them and pointing out, like, this self-righteous man, in a sense, is sinning in his pride and his self-righteousness. But that's not classified as a sinner. The two classifications that you'll find if you look up kind of the context of this is sinners are the Gentiles, so foreigners, Gentiles, those outside of God's kind of community in a sense. And then the other would be this group of Jews that are not perhaps adhering to the societal standards, or maybe they're viewed as kind of impure in some sort of way. And some examples of that would be these tax collectors. The reason why that they would be classified as that, it's not that literally tax collecting is a sin, but from a lot of the mainstream Jews' mindset is that you are collaborating with Rome, you're collaborating with the enemy, you're dealing with this unclean money in a sense. So it's impure, and the Pharisees are kind of blaming people like the tax collectors for all the problems, because they think if we can be, as God's people, if we can be pure and we can follow Torah, we can just do the best that we absolutely can, that God's going to come and save us from Rome. And it's people like you, the tax collectors, the reason why God hasn't come back yet and delivered us from this. So there's very negative stigmatism towards the tax collectors. And often in their position, they have the propensity, they have the availability to do sin and do wrong. They can mess people over with finances and take advantage of people. But tax collectors in and of themselves, not necessarily sinning, but they're in the classification as sinners. Another would be prostitution, which is different than adultery. Obviously not something that we'd ever want to promote in any kind of way. But oftentimes these women are in a very tough situation. They've lost their father and husband, most likely. They're not doing this to make it really big and well. They're trying to find a way to survive, so they get into this situation where they're prostitutes. It's an impure profession, and it's a sad reality. It's often an indictment, I guess you might say, on the overall culture, is that they should have been taking care of these people in need, but maybe they weren't as well, and so these women find themselves in very little opportunity but to prostitute. Another group would be like the lepers and the sick and the lame. In Scripture, we see lepers, we see different examples of people getting leprosy because they've done something, they've sinned. So there's that idea carries on that somebody has leprosy, like, no, maybe they deserve it. You get this negative mindset. Also, with sick and lame people, like in one part, the disciples asked Yeshua, like, did he sin or did his parents sin? She was like, hey, don't worry about it, effectively. And so there is this continent, and we have that same mindset today. It's very easy to be like, oh, Bob's got that thing going on. I wonder what Bob is doing. And it's easy to get that mindset. These are the kind of the classifications of these outcasts, these social outcasts, and sinners. They're kind of out there. And that's important because it'll come up later. So hang on to that thought. Next, in chapter 18, verse 15 through 17, there's a story of a short story of these young children coming up. They're going to come to the Messiah. People are bringing them up, and then the disciples start rebuking people for bringing children up to him. Yeshua says, no, let them come to me. The kingdom of heaven is like this. So the disciples they see that these young children, they don't think they're worth the time to take the time with the Messiah. And young children are also kind of like social outcasts in a sense. They're like, having children is a blessing, but that blessing usually comes to fruition later. As young children, kind of seen, not heard, like less societally valuable, so to speak. And that theme is going to continue on. Then there's another story here in chapter 18, verses 18 through 25. This is the story of the rich young ruler. And you're probably familiar with it, but this is where the guy comes and says, how do I inherit life? And he says, keep the commandments. Well, I've done that. And Yeshua says, give away all your wealth. Follow me. The guy's pretty sad about it because he's got a lot of wealth. It's hard to give up. And Yeshua says that, it's very difficult for the wealthy, for the rich, to inherit the kingdom. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. So we see that it's difficult, but it's not impossible in a sense, because he then goes on and says, all things are possible with God. And that point will come back later. Hold on to that. So, chapter 18, 35 through 43, we have Yeshua. He's heading to Jerusalem. He's been heading to Jerusalem for the past about 10 chapters. But he's getting closer, and he's going near Jericho now. And there's a blind man that's begging. And he's calling out, have compassion on me, have compassion on me. But then the disciples rebuke him too. Like, hey, be quiet. They're not seeing the value in this man, because he's a social outcast as well. Messiah's like, no. What do you want? If you desire it, I want to see. Go ahead and see. He heals him. He heals his vision. The disciples didn't have the vision, so to speak, to see the value of this man. But they were keeping him far due to his kind of societal ideas of this man's value, so to speak. But Yeshua he's constantly showing a different side of what society is saying has value and doesn't have. A lot of these contrasts. And then in chapter 19, I'm going to read one of her story. This is one of my favorite things. It's just so fun for me. It's chapter 19, it's 1 through 10. This is the story of Zaccheus. We're all familiar with it. We've all heard it every year in church growing up. And I'll read it here. It says, and having entered, so he was coming close to Jericho. Now he's passing through Jericho. And see, a man called Zaccheus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. He was seeking to see who Yeshua was, but was unable because of the crowd. For he was small in stature. Having run ahead, he climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, because he was about to pass by. And as Yeshua came to the place, he looked up and saw him, and said to him, Zaccheus, hurry, come down, for I have to stay at your house today. And he hurried and came down, and received him, rejoicing. And seeing him, they all grumbled, saying, he has gone in to stay with a man who is a sinner. But Zaccheus stood up and said to Master, look, Master, I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have taken whatever from anyone by false accusation, I would pay fourfold. Yeshua said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the son of Adam has come to seek and save what was lost. So he's entering Jericho, and then comes, as he's coming, this chief tax collector, like bad guy of the bad guys, according to societal standards. And he's rich, also generally looked down upon. And then he's a small man. And he hurries. He hurries, runs, and climbs a tree. And in that day, and I think it's still true to this day in some sense, is that you're seeing an adult hurrying or running, especially climbing a tree. It's kind of undignified. Climbing a tree is kind of childish in a sense. Hurrying is a little bit shameful and embarrassing, especially running. And you can think of David. He was undignified when he danced before the ark, and Abraham is actually undignified when he's hurrying to tend to the foreigners that are passing through. But this is like a willingly shame yourself or put yourself in a humbling position for the betterment of something else. So this Zaccheus is showing a humility here to be able to do these things. Then Yeshua sees him and calls to him, says, "Come on down and come into your house today," as the song goes. And then the crowd, they grumble. That sounds familiar to us that like to study the Torah. There's a lot of grumbling for the Israelites. And this grumbling crowd, they accuse him of being a sinner and say Yeshua's going to go spend time with a sinner. We talked about sinners. So they're accusing him, they're seeing him as one thing, and they're accusing him of being this outside class, this impure kind of person due to his association with his job and all that. Then Zaccheus stands up and he says, in verse 8, "Look, Master, I give half my possessions to the poor. If I've taken whatever from anyone by false accusation, I repay fourfold." And this is important to know. And in the Greek, this is very clearly stated. It says, "I give." It says, "I repay." It doesn't say, "I will give," or "I will repay." My whole life I've been taught that this man repented for all the bad he had done, and that this was like his changed mind kind of thing. And that's the way it's been taught to me. And there's been a lot of beautiful things that come from that, because that's a great story of repentance and changed life. But I'm here to suggest that the narrative here throughout this is that we're seeing people one way, and we're supposed to be seeing them the way God's got the true vision to see how these people are. And I think this is a notable time to mention that Zaccheus' name means innocent. This whole time, Zaccheus is innocent, but he's been accused of being a sinner. He's accused of being kind of this far from God person. But Yeshua is trying to come to these people that are far off and take them close. This guy ends up being the righteous rich man that the young ruler was not capable of. In a sense, you could make the case that the narrative is trying to show a connection to young children, as he's a short man as well. He's the righteous tax collector in that contrast of the Pharisee that society thinks is righteous because he's doing all the religious things. Then there's this tax collector that actually is righteous and humble. And here Zaccheus is kind of fulfilling all these narratives and the stories, kind of building up to him in a really beautiful way. And he has these problems. He's short and he's rich, and these are things that can keep him far from God in a sense. But he sees these as challenges that can be overcome. So he overcomes these challenges by climbing a tree. You can see Yeshua. He overcomes his wealth by willfully giving it away to the poor. So he cannot see, but he does something to change it. The crowd thinks that they can see, but they actually can't. They're actually blind. They're like the blind man in the previous chapter. So we see that this is a beautiful narrative that really comes all together. And just to help fasten the nails in it, in a sense, as far as the overall wisdom of God, is that this entire story really connects to the children of Israel as they go through the wilderness and they're making their way into the promised land. They have to pass through Jericho. And they send these two spies, thematically connected to the Messiah. And they have to go to the home of a sinner. They go to a prostitute's house. Just as Yeshua says, salvation has come to your home, salvation came to her home. She was saved. This is all through the wisdom of God. All these stories can connect quite so well, and it's a beautiful thing. But I encourage you to kind of read through this section, read through Joshua 2, think about what the narrative is really building up towards. Of us judging people in one way and it actually being another way. Seeing what the kind of things that Yeshua is really looking for. And sometimes we can be blind like the disciples, where we're like, no. But we don't have the vision. And so something to think about. I will leave it at that, and I'm going to let Les come up. He's going to fill in for Jeff, since Jeff is dealing with his father now. So Les is going to teach Torah portion.